Hi, I'm John Davidson, lead pastor at Evangel Temple. Thank you so much for tuning into the message today. I hope it's a blessing and an encouragement to you. If it is, leave us a note in the comments. We'd love to hear from you. I hope you enjoyed this message from God's Word today.
And so we're going to hop into a topic this morning, a question this morning that's a pretty big one, I think. Well, in a lot of ways, it's what this whole series has kind of been building toward, but we've covered so far in our first week, Pastor John bringing the word about why Christianity is so wonderful in that it is exclusive. How could there really be only one way to God? And so he handles how Christianity is exclusive, but yet it leads to the most inclusive sort of people in the world, which is wonderful. And then last week, Dr. Alan Tennyson showing us the beauty of the scriptures and the part that the Word of God plays in our spiritual development. Because I don't know if you know this or not, but everybody's being spiritually formed. Everybody. You might not be a Christian. You can be a Christian. Everybody's being formed spiritually in some way. It just depends on what that content, what is it that is doing the forming in your life. And so he showed us how the Word plays a part in our spiritual development. And today, the question that we're going to handle that comes to us this morning is Christianity believable? Is it reasonable to believe that Christianity is true? Is it coherent? Does it actually lead to fulfillment, and does it play itself out in my life to show that it actually is livable? Because every belief system has implications. No matter what you believe, everybody has a belief system of some kind, and that belief system, if you live truly according to it, it will lead to particular implications and results in your life. So you might be even saying in your head, to me this morning, you're going, hey, I know a lot of people who live perfectly happy lives who don't believe in God, Eric. There's plenty of people that live that. And I would tend to agree with you. I know plenty of people who don't believe in God and who live perfectly happy lives too. But here's why I think that is. I think it's because they haven't come to the place of really reckoning with the implications of living in a world, really, where God does not exist. Because that has certain implications in your life if you are going to live consistently. Now, here's what happens. Lots of times we discover that an implication of my belief system isn't actually livable, and so I have to smuggle in beliefs from other viewpoints or other worldviews in order to actually make it livable. So here's what we're going to do this morning. In order to answer this question of whether or not Christianity is livable, or believable, I'm going to show that it is more consistent with our human experience and it is livable. And I'm going to show that primarily compared to a more materialistic, secular point of view, which says that really the world is just all that it is all that we can see. It's just the material. There's no spiritual realm. I'm going to primarily deal with that viewpoint, though there will be some other religions that compare to as well. But what we can do then is we can say, okay, what are the implications of that belief system, and are they livable? And we can compare them. We can compare a secular worldview with a Christian worldview and go, okay, which one actually is more consistent with our human experience and is really livable? So that's the first thing that we're going to do. The second thing I try to do is to show that Christianity has had a profound impact on our world, especially within the first several hundred years of Christianity. After Jesus is resurrected and Christianity starts to just flood and go out into the world, it has huge ramifications that we, in our day and age, we enjoy so many things that were actually not a norm for a lot of human history. But when Christianity comes on the scene, it brings a revolution into the world. And so if you're saying, hey, Eric, that's great. What if Christianity is true? So what? What difference does it make? Why should I care? That second point, I'm going to attempt to show that actually, yes, it does matter, because it has profoundly shaped and revolutionized our world as we know it. And I believe still is and can. So there's the kind of the outline for where we're going here this morning. All right, so first, let's talk about the absurdity of life without God, okay? Because this is actually a point that the scriptures make as well. If you look at Ecclesiastes chapter 3, starting in verse 19 through 20, the writer says this: "Surely the fate of human beings is like that of animals. The same fate awaits them both. As one dies, so dies the other. All have the same breath. Humans have no advantage over animals. Everything is meaningless. All go to the same place. All come from dust, and to dust all return." So in Ecclesiastes, the writer is showing us the futility of pleasure, of wealth, of education, of fame, of honor. It's all just pointless. It's meaningless in the end. Because why? Because if God doesn't exist and we all just die and there's nothing in the end that continues and it makes no impact in the end, he's saying then it's all pointless. He says, vanity of vanities in chapter 1, verse 2. That is unless the God of the Bible actually exists. That is unless the God of the Bible exists. So you go, well, Eric, man, how can he make that claim? And how can you make that claim that everything is pointless and meaningless unless God exists? I'm going to attempt to show that the absurdity of life in three different ways. And these three things, I think, are very much rooted in our human experience. The first of it is the absurdity of eternity without God. The absurdity of eternity without God. See, if your worldview is that there is no God who has both purposed our existence and given it significance, and that we just live in a purely material world, that this is all there is, what does that mean for you? Here's what that means. You are the accidental byproduct of nature. You're a result of matter plus time plus chance. There's no reason for your existence. All you face is death. Whether sooner or later, it makes no difference because your existence makes no difference. In the end, when the universe has finally cooled and begins to collapse, there will be nothing except, as William Lane Craig says, no light, no heat, no life, only the corpses of dead stars and galaxies, ever expanding into endless darkness. It will not matter if you were good or bad, lived a long time or a short time. Everything in the end will have been for nothing. Samuel Beckett is a playwright, and he has this play called Breathe that kind of draws out this point. People have remade it on YouTube. You can go look it up if you would be interested in that. But the stage in this play, the curtain opens to a stage full of trash and junk. And the audience then stares on at this trash and junk for 30 seconds. And then the curtains close, and that's it. And what's the point? This is the point. This is our existence, is what the point is. That if there is no God, this is all there is, then it may as well be this. The curtain closes, and that's it. Now, you go, Eric, you're kind of being stark here. You're being maybe a little bit overly dramatic here, maybe. But if the universe is purely material and that there is no spiritual realm, this is what we're left with. But yet I think we know. See, our human experience in our heart, intuitively, there's something within us that we just know that can't be true, right? That this can't be all that there is, that it doesn't just end right here, and it's not just pointless and meaningless, that there's something that goes beyond. And I think the Christian worldview is drastically different and unique compared to that of the secular materialistic worldview, as well as that of other religions as well. See, let me show it to you. Unlike the materialistic worldview, Christianity makes sense of this yearning that we have for life to go on. It takes seriously this sense that humanity shares, that death is not just a part of the natural process in the circle of life. You guys remember the Disney film, The Lion King. Yes, thank you, right? Where you have Mufasa and Simba, and they're having this conversation. And then he's just saying, hey, it's all about the circle of life, right? That we eat the antelope, but hey, when we die, we go down into the ground, and then we're fertilized, so the grass grows, and then the antelope eat the grass. And so, see, it's just this circle that takes place. But I think we know it's not just a circle that takes place. It's not the circle of life. Death isn't natural. Death is an intruder, and there's something within us, and we go that it shouldn't be this way, that death, it ought not be that way. And I think Christianity takes seriously that. Tim Keller points out how the Christian hope for eternity is so unique when he says that our eternity within the Christian worldview is restorative and personal and sure. Let me just kind of elaborate a little bit on each of those. It's restorative because Christianity says that we're not just going to experience an eternity as consolation or as payment for the life that we lost. We don't just get heaven in payment for the life that we lost here. No, it's our eternity will be a restoration and a renewing of all things just as they were always supposed to be, just as God had always purposed them for them to be. It'll be an existence where even all of the suffering and the brokenness and even any of the things that we experience in this life, it's as though they will be swallowed up and then taken into an eternity, and our eternity will be that much more full and beautiful because of the life that we lived here. So it's restorative, and you get glimpses of that glory that we'll experience for eternity even now. You get these little glimpses of it. Here's what I mean by that. Is like when you interact with somebody that you're close to, if you're married, indulge me for a moment, because that being one of the more intense of human relationships, you can get this little glimpses of the glory that you see in that person from time to time. And so I think it's going to be as though when we're in eternity and we're interacting with those people that we were close to, you'll come up to them and go, yes, see, I knew that this was who you always were. I knew that the deepest parts of who you were, that this was it. And now I see it in fullness all the time, untainted by the fall, untainted by the sin that's wrecked our world. And so, like, even now, yesterday, my mind's on this message. I'm thinking about it. I'm interacting with my bride, my wife, Melissa. And yesterday, she's in, like, a spunky mood, all right? And, like, it's like that's the best way for me to describe it. She's got this spunk, this joy, this fun to her. She's playing tricks and jokes on me, and she's catching me off guard, and then she'll just smile at me like it's just all okay, and then she just kind of can light up the room with a smile, and she just kind of melts my heart with that smile. And I sit there, and then I looked at her, and I thought, yes, this moment, even right now, I'm getting a glimpse of the glory of who you are, who you will be in fullness one day. Completely. See, this is the Christian worldview, and I don't know about you, but that resonates with my human experience. So it's restorative. Our eternity is restorative, but it's also, our eternity will also be one that is personal. See, within a Buddhist framework, you want to achieve enlightenment so that you can just be the dewdrop that enters back into this ocean called the All-Soul. Whatever that reality existence is, it's not really a personal existence because you just enter back into this it's like a dewdrop entering into the ocean. It's just this mass of reality that you enter back into. But Christianity says, no, you're going to have a real, physical, renewed existence, new heavens and new earth where you will be able to touch and we'll be able to eat and we'll be able to work. We don't have all of the details around what that looks like, but we know that it will be a real existence, not an ethereal sort of existence. And so it'll be personal, but it also will be sure. It's a sure existence to come. See, in other religious frameworks, you have to measure up and achieve certain things in order to experience whatever that heaven, whatever that paradise is in eternity. So yeah, other religions have a perspective of eternity as well. But within the Christian framework, it's sure, because it doesn't depend upon my efforts in order to experience that eternity. In other religious frameworks, like let's say you take a karmic religion, for instance, where you're just on this karmic cycle until you finally do well enough to get out of the karmic cycle to experience eternity. Or within, like I said, the Buddhist framework, or you have a framework of Islam where you have to achieve certain rules and live up to a certain standard in order to achieve that paradise in the end. But Christianity is vastly different. It says it doesn't depend on my efforts. It's already been done for me in the person of Jesus. God's standard is so high for what he has for us that he goes, yeah, you can't measure up. That's what the law was supposed to show us all along, that we cannot live up to God's standards. And this is so beautiful. He goes, I'm going to come and do it for you. So that's what all the Old Testament is building up to, this point where Jesus enters into the world, the God-man. He's both fully human and fully God, and he's utterly rejected by his creation, and he lives a perfect life in our place and gives himself for us. It's not dependent upon my work. He's already done it. And now everything I do, see, the more deeply you can begin to get that and understand it and root it in your heart, the more joy and the more ability you actually have to be able to live doing all of the things that God would have us do. It's not because you have to, but when you have the motivation of love, see, duty can take you this far. Love can take you so much further. And how much greater love can any of us see than the love that Jesus has given us? Anyway, so it's a sure existence to come. So and if you live in a world where God doesn't exist, you experience the absurdity of eternity, but we also experience the absurdity of meaning without God. You experience the absurdity with meaning. Everybody has to have meaning in life. You cannot live without a sense of meaning in your life. You will attach it to something somehow in your life. And you can't have it really. I'm going to argue you can't really have it to a satisfying degree if you live in a world where God doesn't exist. And you might respond and say, well, Eric, come on, again, you are just dramatic, man. I know that I can live a perfectly meaningful life if I just create my meaning for myself. Why can't I just create my own meaning? What's wrong with that? Well, there's several things that make that actually unlivable. Because remember, the sort of the premise I laid out earlier, we all have a belief system, and those systems lead to particular implications. They lead to a certain result in your life. And this one is no different. If you're going to just create your meaning for yourself, here's what that does. Your created meaning will then turn your deepest experiences into illusions. It takes your deepest experience and turns them into an illusion. So here's what I mean by that. Let's use the example of love, for instance. I think no matter your background or worldview, whether you're a Christian or not in this place, we all could probably agree that probably the supreme thing that gives life a lot of meaning is love. Love gives meaning so much depth. And here's what happens if you live in a world where there is no God and you just say, hey, all there is just the material things that we interact with. There is no spiritual realm. Then here's what that means for us. It means that love that you have for your child or for a spouse, for a parent, for that friend, that really close friend, that love, that sense of connection you have to them, here's all that it is in a purely material world, it's just chemical reactions that are happening in your brain that make you feel the way that you feel. But I think that we know, right? There's something, again, in our human experience that we intuitively have this sense that that's not all that love is. There's something deeper and going beyond that. For instance, I was able to take my boys on some dad dates over the weekend. I have 3 boys, and my 2 oldest ones, we live close to a bowling alley, so on each of the afternoons over the weekend, I took them one at a time, and we went bowling. and I'm interacting with them, and I know that this message is coming, so I'm thinking about this point here as I'm interacting with my boys. And I'm watching them like roll the ball down. It shatters the pins. Well, as best as they can roll it anyway. And then they turn back, and he's going, Dad, did you see that? And he's got this big old smile, and he comes and gives me a high five. Then he comes up and he wraps his arms around me. And Jack goes, Dad, I love when we have times just you and me. And I go, I do too, son. And he gives me this whole big high five, and then I go and bowl, and he's like teasing me while I bowl, and he's going, Dad, don't hit those pins, don't hit those pins. And I just, and I'm bowling, and then Calvin's got this smile that is like the biggest, cheesiest smile. That kid's going to be such a heartbreaker. It's going to be crazy. And so I'm interacting with him, and I'm going, this is not just a chemical reaction in my brain. There's something deeper at work here. There's some longing within the human heart where we go, I want love, and I want love not just for this life, but for life to go on, right? For love that lasts and goes on forever. And I think Christianity gives us the grounds for it. That's why C.S. Lewis said this, that if we can find within our hearts things that this world cannot satisfy, then maybe we were made for another world. And I think he's right. So it turns our deepest experiences into illusions, but your own created meaning, yeah, you can do that, but it's super fragile. It's fragile. Think about this. Whatever you create your meaning around, if it's not God, it has to be something in this world. And if it's in this world, that means it's contingent. That means it can be taken from you. So let's say you attach your meaning to your work. What if you lose your job? You attach it to having a family. What if you can't have a family? Attach it to having a spouse. Well, what if you don't get a spouse? Or what if the spouse leaves you? Or what if they pass away? Everything in this world, it can be taken from you. Or what about this? What if you can't achieve it? What if somebody else's created meaning infringes upon your created meaning over here? Then whose is right? Whose created meaning wins when somebody's one created meaning infringes upon another? And so it's just fragile, and I'm telling you, it seems to me that it just doesn't work. It's not livable. And it's why William Lane Craig, he makes this point along these same lines, that created meaning is not the same thing as ultimate meaning. See, if the universe, everything in the universe, if its ultimate end is pointless and meaningless, and civilization is just a little blip on the radar in the entirety of the universe's history, if we're just a little blip on the radar, and it doesn't matter whether you're good, bad, lived long, or short, then all of the sum along the way of all of the universal history, then if that's pointless, then all of the sum is pointless too. And so he says that you have to just, if you want to live a satisfying life and also believe that there is no God, then you have to just turn off your brain a little bit. You need to stop thinking about ultimate meaning very much. And this isn't just Christians who recognize this. This is kind of startling. Check this out. In the American Academy for the Advancement of Science, there was an address in 1991 by Dr. D.L. Rue, who advocated that we deceive ourselves by some means of a noble lie into thinking that we have value. And he says, without such lies, we cannot live. Why does he say that? He says that because he knows, and we know, that we cannot live a life without meaning. But you see what happens? If you're going to deceive yourself of a noble lie, the more you think about it, the less you're actually able to bear with it. The more you try to convince yourself of some lie that I need to create my meaning, create a noble lie for myself, well, that means then you have to stop thinking very deeply about that thing in order for you to experience meaning in life. But Christianity is vastly different. Vastly different. See, within the Christian worldview, you don't check your brain at the door. Actually, if a Christian is saying that they're not experiencing a very meaningful life, I'm experiencing this sense of meaninglessness in my life right now, then I would say they're not thinking deeply enough about the beauty that has been offered to them within the Christian faith. The Christian faith is giving us so many resources right here. There's so many resources, and we got to press into them. We have to press into those resources. So if again, a Christian is experiencing meaninglessness, that means that they're not thinking deeply enough about the eternal hope to come and all of the purpose that God has placed within his creation. They're not thinking about how he's made them for a love relationship with himself. They're not thinking about how they're made in his image with great worth and value. They're not thinking about how even in their suffering, God is working all things together and he's bringing good out of it, and that he's going and want to one day restore all things, and every wrong will be undone and every tear wiped away and everything will be as though it was supposed to be in the very end. They're not thinking deeply enough if they're experiencing meaninglessness. And so I think within Christianity, lots of times people of faith, it kind of becomes, sometimes people say, see, I can't make the leap of faith. I'm more of a rational person. I think you're actually being irrational if you don't have a belief system that causes you to think more deeply about meaning, about morality and eternity. And so in a world without God, you experience the absurdity of meaning. You experience the absurdity of eternity, which was the first one. And then thirdly, we also experience the absurdity of moral obligation. See, if you remove God as the one who has defined for us good and evil, what you've also done is removed any grounding for objectively saying that anything is good or evil. What I mean by objectively, I mean by that is that there are some things that are really right and there are some things that are really wrong. No matter on the time of it, no matter on the place in history or who was involved, for all people at all places at all times, certain things are right and certain things are wrong. That's objectivity. But if you remove God as the one who defines that, the grounding for it, now what we're left with is your opinion against mine and my opinion against yours. And who wins? Who gets to win? Whose opinion is actually more valuable? Is it whoever has the most power? Well, surely something within us goes, no, that's not right. That doesn't resonate. And so if we want to have an objective standard for things, then God has to exist. Dostoevsky was a Russian writer of the 1800s, and he wrote a couple of novels that sort of draw out this point. In his Crime and Punishment, a young atheist who is convinced of moral relativism, and by that, again, it's opinion. Everybody comes up with their own moral obligations of right and wrong. You come up with it for yourself because there is no lawgiver. We come up with our own, right? So it's opinion. And he's convinced, this character, that moral relativism is true. And thereafter in the story, he brutally murders an old woman. And though he knows intellectually that on his moral relativism that he should not feel any guilt, he's nonetheless consumed by guilt until he finally confesses his crime and gives his life to God. I find this just to be so interesting. He's surprised that he in fact feels guilt. He's surprised. I shouldn't have it, but it's there. It's almost like this. It's almost like there's a moral realm out there that is imposing itself upon us that we cannot get away from. And though we try to, it's impossible. This moral realm imposes itself upon us. Maybe the Apostle Paul was right when he wrote in Romans 2:15, they demonstrate that God's law is written on their hearts. For their conscience and thoughts either accuse them or tell them they are doing right. So moral absolutes, without moral absolutes, man's endeavors degenerate into absurdity. And this is even the admission of materialistic philosophers who have the same worldview. They recognize the same thing. They, when pressed, will say, one of them said this, the moral principles that govern our behavior are rooted in habit and custom, feeling and fashion. Another, the biologist Richard Dawkins says this, there is at bottom no design, no purpose, no evil, no good, nothing but pointless indifference. We are machines for propagating DNA. But I think we know that we're more than that. I think we know that there's something deeper going on within us, that we just can't live that way. So I think we see on the secular materialistic worldview that it's just not livable. And let me be clear that nobody is saying, I'm not saying that an agnostic person, somebody who's unsure about God's existence, or the atheist who's kind of pretty sure that God doesn't exist, I'm not saying they can't be good. But what we are saying is that in order to live, if you're going to live consistently with your worldview that there is no God who defines for us good and evil, then there's nothing at all restraining the human heart from the worst kinds of cruelty. Richard Wurmbrand, who had been tortured for his faith in communist prisons, writes of his experience, and he says this: "There is no restraint from the depths of evil which is in the man. The communist torturers often said, 'There is no God, no hereafter, no punishment for evil. We can do what we wish.' I have heard one torturer say, 'I thank God in whom I do not believe that I have lived to this hour when I can express all of the evil in my heart.'" Now, that sounds pretty stark, right? And one might say, well, Eric, you're just giving us you're giving the extreme examples. Yeah, you're right. I'm giving the extreme examples, but it's only the extreme examples that wake us up out of the inconsistent ways with which we live. They wake us up out of that. And not only does a world without God open the door to all kinds of horror that can take place, but think about what it does to your idea of virtue. Think about what it does to virtue. See, I think most of us, we could understand there's a human inclination for us to want to praise people who give of themselves, who sacrifice themselves for the good of somebody else, right? No matter your worldview, I think there's a human inclination, there's probably a good amount of agreement in here that self-sacrifice is a noble thing to do for the good of others. But on a purely materialistic worldview, it's survival of the fittest. It's natural selection. It's the strong eat the weak. And so what good reason is there on a purely materialistic worldview to say that is a virtuous action to give of yourself for the good of another? Actually, it's quite the opposite. You should conserve. You shouldn't give yourself away on a purely materialistic worldview. But again, see, we know that can't just be the way it is. And here's the final point. So I showed you we were going to demonstrate the absurdity of life without God. But then I wanted to show you the profound impact that Christianity has made in the world, and actually how it's revolutionized the world from its beginning. And this is why that's important, because somebody might in here go, well, Eric, okay, you're talking about self-sacrifice. What grounding does Christianity have for that? Do people who are followers of Jesus, are Jesus followers actually self-sacrificial? Do they really live that way? And I would argue, yes, they did. One, we have a grounding for it. Jesus did it. God himself, in the person of Jesus, came and gave himself away, self-sacrifice, and whenever we worship him, now we can do likewise, because you become what you worship. That's a kind of a universal principle. You will become what you worship, and if we're following Jesus, then we will become like him, able to give ourselves away just as he did. But also it did this. Let's look at early Christian history here. It revolutionized things for women. In contrast to pagan and Greek religions, Christians admitted both women and men, both free and bound, to equal membership and obliged them to worship together. The first time in history where we see that taking place. Celsus, who was an early critic of Christianity, he regarded the disproportionate number of women among Christians as evidence of Christianity's irrationality. He looks in on it and goes, see all the women who are part of that? That's why I can't believe it. But we look on and go, no, that's actually demonstrating that it's giving them worth and value. David Bentley Hart says this: there can be little question regarding the benefits that the new faith conferred upon ordinary women. And it even insisted on the communal provision for the needs of widows, who were of all classes the most disadvantaged of all people. For the first time, women were not having to marry out of survival because they had to attach themselves to a family to be cared for. No longer did they have to marry out of survival, but now they could choose whether or not to be married. Why? Because the church was caring for them. How about for Christian husbands? They were commanded to remain faithful to their wives, were forbidden to treat them with cruelty, abandon them, or divorce them. What about for the rich? Did it have any impact on the rich? There's a 3rd century document that gives instructions for how bishops of that century were supposed to conduct themselves. And it says this, that they were to never interrupt, a bishop was never to interrupt his service to greet a person of high degree or wealth. But on seeing a poor man or woman enter the assembly, that same bishop should do everything in his power to make room for the new arrival, even if he himself should have to sit upon the floor. How about for the poor? The Emperor Julian reprimanded the pagan priests, and he was a critic of Christianity. So this Emperor Julian, he's a critic of Christianity, and he reprimands his pagan priests and encourages them to imitate the Galileans, that is the Christians, because they support not only their own poor, but ours also. And yet we give not even to our own. Isn't that interesting? Or how about with orphans? That same early Christian document that was an instruction manual, so to speak, for bishops, says that the duties of a bishop were to include the education of orphans, aid for poor widows, and the purchase of food and firewood for the destitute. How about this? In 251, the church in Rome alone had more than 1,500 dependents on its rolls. And David Bentley Hart says that Christianity came along and it forbade the ancient practice of exposure of unwanted infants, who in most cases were girls. Christian husbands, moreover, could not force their wives to submit to abortions or to consent to infanticide. How about with the sick? During the great pandemic plagues of 251 to 266, the Christians in the 2 great North African cities, when everybody else is leaving because plague is spreading everywhere, everybody else is leaving. Both Christian clergy and laity alike distinguished themselves by their willingness to care for the ill and bury the dead, even at the cost of their own lives. Why would they stay? Because George Herbert, the poet, said, within the gospel, if you believe the gospel, death is no longer an executioner, but only a gardener. So these Christians can give of themselves. They can give their lives away. People are dying of plague, and they're staying in the cities to care because these people have worth and value. They've been made in the image of God, and so they stay and care for them. Now, I don't know what you do with all of this material. There's a lot that I've said. I know I've talked a lot. Hopefully I've preached to your head and to your heart a little bit. Hopefully we've done both. But I don't know about you, but the implications of a Christian worldview, as we've been able to follow, like, here's what the faith is, and here's the implications. Here's the belief of materialism, here's the implication. I don't know about you, but at least on a Christian worldview, I look at this and I go, man, I sure want it to be true. I sure hope it's true, because it makes so much sense of my human experience. Now look, there is so much more that could be said that bears so much weight for how Christianity is believable and reasonable. But I just wanted to show you today that, golly, it's devastating if it's not true. It's devastating to our existence if Christianity is not true. But we distract ourselves. We keep ourselves from actually having to bear with the implications in our lives.
Thanks again for watching the service today. I hope it was an encouragement to you. We'd love to hear from you, so if you'd like to leave a note in the comments and let us know what you thought about the message, we'd love that. And if you're ever in the Springfield, Missouri area on a Sunday morning, we'd love to have you join us for church. You can attend our 8 a.m. classic service, or you can join us for church at 9:30 or 11.